Different. But Sanjeev, he was in front of it all on together. Wilbur workers' rights. Sanjeev Kumar.
It's our pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, the second in the series of the webinars that NAB intends to host across different commodities. Last month, it was on coffee. My name is Ranjit Kumar and I work as the Regional General Manager in NAB. For this webinar, due to frequent internet outages, we have two moderators, my colleague Ashok and myself. In the event of me getting logged out, he will take over. For the benefit of those who are new to the Fairtrade system, I'll just give a brief about NAB. NAB is one of the producer network of Fairtrade International, working to secure a better deal and living conditions for the workers and farmers in 295 Fairtrade certified organizations across different commodities in 21 countries of Asia and Pacific. We currently have 63 tea producers from India, Sri Lanka, China, and Vietnam. The crisis that's affecting us is one of a kind, and we hope every one of you are keeping healthy with your families and loved ones. We are aware of the impact of COVID-19 on businesses across the globe, with the world economy estimated to plunge between 13% to 32% in 2020, as per WTO projections. The unprecedented nature of health crisis has severely disrupted international trade as well as global supply chains with multiple logistic bottlenecks. Needless to say, our tea producers have also felt the effects. However, we sincerely acknowledge and appreciate the fact that our producers, the workers in the tea plantations, are out there working for us in the production, harvesting, processing stages to keep the show running. At the same time, we feel the need of the hour is for the producers and businesses to look beyond the challenges and to develop new strategies to build resilience and revive their supply chain. One of the main outcomes of a previous coffee webinar was that the quicker our producers and businesses respond to these changes, the easier it will be for them to recover from the impact in the long term. Therefore, the main idea of this webinar is to engage different supply chain actors under one forum to share innovative ideas and exchange information on adaptation and to strengthen strategies employed on the ground and at the market front. We have also seen great determination from stakeholders across the value chain to overcome these adversities. We take this opportunity to thank all our tea producers, traders, buyers, consumers, and well-wishers for their sheer determination to keep the product fair, even when the world is going through an unfair deal. Once more, we welcome you all to this webinar, and without further ado, let's delve into the program. We commence today's proceedings with a brief poll to understand the composition of the audience. Please take 2 minutes to fill in the poll. The poll, please. Thank you so much for taking part in the poll. The results are there for everyone to see. The traders, the traders are a 4%, companies 6%, Fairtrade internal system 51%, tea producers 27%, media houses educational 12%. Thank you so much for taking the time to submit the poll work. We request now, before we start, that the audience, the attendees may type their questions in the question box. We will take up these questions once all the speakers have spoken. And in the event of your questions not being answered, please be assured that emails will be sent to you individually. To start with the presentation, I now invite Mr. Sanjeet Singh Khurana, our Chief Operating Officer. Some background about Mr. Sanjeet Singh Khurana. He comes with 2.5 decades of experience in agribusiness. He started his career with Harrison's Malayalam and then moved to Tata Coffee. He has since worked with Olam in Laos and Papua New Guinea. Mr. Sanjeet Singh Khurana will be giving us an update of activities conducted by NAP in the time of crisis. Thank you.
Okay, am I audible? Can you just confirm? Anybody can confirm if I'm audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, Ranjit. Good day to all and a warm welcome to everybody who's joined us for this webinar. Great to have an expert panel who will share the insights and experiences and also answer your questions towards the end. I'll start with a brief of the impact this pandemic has had and continues to have on the businesses and people in the APAC region. In-depth analysis of the disruptions, adopting new strategies, and the way forward will be discussed by the other panelists also. So let's begin. Can we go to the first slide, please? Okay, these are some of the topics in brief that I will be touching upon. And I'll start first with the context and approach. So the next slide. Okay. The origin and timing of this virus is still being debated, and has some world leaders and the WHO at loggerheads as to who should the blame be pinned on. But the impact has been felt across the globe, and no country has been left unscathed. Different countries are adopting different approaches to contain and cope with this pandemic, and some countries have learned better than others in formulating responses, especially after having gone through the SARS and the 2007-2008 food crisis. The most widely adopted approach has been the lockdown approach, which has in most countries disrupted parts of the value chain, particularly the food production and processing and transport sectors. The disruption in supply chains due to the lockdown measures has seen the biggest impact on perishables. All this because farmers were not able to harvest their produce in time or transport them to the market in time. Yeah. Next slide, please. The impact and the severity is as diverse as the region itself, and all players in the supply chain are facing enormous challenges. But undoubtedly, I think the most vulnerable at the bottom of the pyramid are suffering the most. Farmers are struggling due to cash crunch, resulting in drastic reduction of their production capacities for the upcoming season. The companies and traders are facing the same issues, which is directly impacting the workers and farmers in their system. But again, like I said, the biggest impact this pandemic has had on the agriculture sector is that of manpower displacement, especially the migrant workers. The supply chain in Asia is not as mechanized as you know compared to the West. And this has impacted not only the upstream activities, but also transportation and distribution. The tea industry also has, also to a large extent, depends on seasonal migratory workers for various activities, which have also been severely impacted during this period. Some tried and trusted management strategies are being questioned now, and the economists are, suggesting moving from just in time to just in case. All of this has, in my opinion, exposed the fragility of an interdependent global economy, as exporting countries are imposing trade restrictions to keep the supplies to themselves. The start-stop scenario, as we are seeing right now, has also left everybody guessing as to what to expect next going forward. Another metric of food security is food affordability, which is generally measured by food prices. The increase in the prices, what we see right now, mainly reflects the supply chain delays rather than the real shortages. Next slide, please. What are the concerns and challenges that we face? Well, with the monsoon season already started in most of the countries in the region, a big concern in the APAC is the disruption in planting, which, as you know, is heavily dependent on the rains and has to be perfectly planned. And now, as governments in most countries move towards reopening their economies, people and businesses are challenged to balance between health and food security. This has again forced some countries to consider reimposing the lockdowns. Some things which are specific to tea, we've seen in Sri Lanka, the industry leaders quickly deployed a virtual e-auction system that keeps buyers and sellers safely apart and socially distanced. This e-auction solution reduced the impact on almost 2 million people in the Sri Lankan tea industry and sheltered them from the major negative consequences of the COVID-19 related disruptions. On the other side, in India, the world's second largest producer of tea, the exports are estimated to be hit by 6 to 7% this year, according to some estimates, while other projections are as high as 20% decline in exports. The lockdown in early March impacted access to Indian tea fields in the north, where 2/3 of the tea is grown. Impact was particularly felt hard in Assam and Darjeeling, as the lockdowns came at the time of the prized first flush harvest, which brings in a major chunk of the annual revenue. In South India, the plantations were allowed to work with 50% of the workforce, and many export orders were either deferred or cancelled. I was just reading, according to the Indian Tea Association, the first quarter COVID-19 related losses will exceed 275 million USD. Ironically, and it is fortunate that some countries have not been that all countries have not been infected or are not showing peak at the same time. So thankfully, this has provided window of opportunity to tackle the disrupted supply chains. It has also provided opportunities for later infected countries to learn from the mitigation actions taken by the others who were impacted earlier. Next slide, please. Some economic projections. Global credit rating agency has forecast the permanent income loss for the Asia Pacific close to $620 billion US dollars, which is 55% higher than its previous projections, which were made earlier, just at the onset of the pandemic. And of course, as we see, it's continuing to rise. The region's economic growth forecast has also been reduced from 3% to 2.7% for the year 2020. This projection was again before the fear of the second wave, which now seems to be looming large on us. Now the figures are more grim, unfortunately. Developing Asia, a group of 45 countries in the APAC region, is expected to post a growth of just about 0.1% in 2020, which is supposed to be the lowest since 1961. Yeah. Some strong economies like Singapore have also gone into negative territory as of now. The Asian Development Bank has also estimated that the economic losses in APAC could range from $1.7 trillion under a short containment scenario of 3 months, which is unlikely, to as high as 2.5 trillion USD under a long containment scenario of 4 months. And this will account for 30% of the overall decline in global output. And as we see things developing, this is the more probable situation that we're going to be facing. Next slide, please. How do we adapt to change? Well, in the Asia Pacific region, which is home to over 60% of humanity, has a very diverse food system and multiplexes of supply chains. The sub-regions are frequently exposed to severe weather conditions and some of the most challenging environments for agriculture. The unpredictable variables and the frequency is increasing the risk of farming. In this scenario, adoption of smart agriculture tools in precision farming will certainly help farmers manage better with the limited resources available. It will certainly help in controlling pest and disease, increase productivity and quality, optimize water usage, which will thereby reduce the overall cost of production. Smart agriculture and precision farming are very closely related, and the most important tool in smart agriculture is the use of digital technologies. With increased communication, farmers can anticipate and adapt to changes much faster. Geotagging of farms and use of sensors to monitor crop and soil health are also being widely adopted. These analytical tools are used to make agriculture more predictive by planning all agricultural operations and reducing the variables, basically. The biggest contributor to farm-generated greenhouse gases is attributed to excessive use of chemicals, chemical fertilizers, and release of carbon from the soil, which is mainly due to excessive tillage and inappropriate tillage, basically. Biodynamic, regenerative farming, conservation agriculture, multi-strata agroforestry, and other impact farming methods all contribute to carbon sequestration by drawing out the carbon from the atmosphere and capturing it in soil sinks for release to the crops later. Overall, these practices will certainly help in mitigating the risks of climate change and its impact on agriculture. I know it's a very vast and interesting topic, so probably we can organize a separate seminar for this very soon. There could be a different commercial view, I understand, but what we need to do is find the right balance between commercial farming and responsible farming And in my opinion, the first challenge is to change the mindset. But that is the only way but that is, I guess, the only way forward if you really want to practice sustainability in agriculture. Another change, what we have been seeing with the onset of this pandemic, is the growing focus on support to local businesses and producers. This is gaining traction in many countries, and because of this, we need to start reimagining marketing strategies through shorter supply chains to start with, and other action to follow. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, coming to my last slide, continuing support to our members. I think that's the spread of the virus continues as we speak, and we will have to wait and watch when different regions hit their peak and then start tapering off. At NAP, all our communication channels have been open and are open, and we continue to stay connected with our members to help them navigate through these challenging times. Majority of our producers have taken the lead in conducting awareness programs and campaigns, like providing medical supplies and rations to their workers and farmers. NAP, along with FI and our other partners, have developed a relief and resilience fund for both emergency support and also to help rebuild the depleted production capacities of our producer members. Many government schemes have been introduced to support farmers and agriculture-related supply chain players, and our program officers are keeping our members updated on that. We certainly are on different boats, but are facing the same storm. So I hope we are able to face the challenges together, and which certainly is going to, increase our resilience, and probably will come out stronger. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for joining this webinar, and I also welcome those who are just joining us now. I now hand back the platform to Ranjit. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeet, for such a detailed presentation on the effects of pandemic. An economic downturn of such magnitude is certainly foretelling untold economic hardships on the economically vulnerable. But as all negative events have a positive side, we certainly hope the positive side takes over. The second speaker for the day is Mr. Wilbur Flinterman. He is a senior advisor of workers' rights and trade union relations in Fairtrade International. A former lawyer, Mr. Flinterman has an industry experience of almost 25 years, and he's associated with the Fairtrade International for the last 9 years. He'll be talking about the workers' rights and living wages for Fairtrade workers in COVID times. Mr. Flinterman.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It feels as if I'm among friends, and many of you have already previously met in India and in Sri Lanka. I've been to Pakistan as well. I'd like to start this this presentation by saying that I work out of Bonn, Germany. And I'm not here this morning to deliver you with information that you are already familiar with. Many of you have a very long experience in your respective occupations and sectors, so you don't need somebody from Germany to tell you what is happening in your country. What I would like to do, though, is to perhaps ignite some dialogue and some further thinking about pregnant issues that affect us all in the fair trade system. Whether you work at the International Secretariat or in one of the national fair trade organizations in the market or in the producer networks, some of these issues affect us all. So that would be my introduction. Next slide, please. So we already heard from Sanjeet how the disastrous pandemic is wreaking havoc in many countries and industries in Asia. and is affecting producers and workers of the NAP. And in tea specifically, I've been told that workers have suffered particularly as a result of temporary layoffs that fortunately they were then undone. Workers were able at some point to return to the estates. There's also an increase of working hours that puts a strain on people. And of course, the migrant flows of people that return to the north from elsewhere and that are looking for housing and joining their families on the estates. So they are basically the non-employed residents of estate housing, which is also a problem. And then I think what we should also note is that there may be some political interests in some countries to use this pandemic as basically an opportunity to roll back workers' rights in the name of protecting the economy. I sincerely wonder if that is the right thing to do. And I believe that if such a thing is taking place, for instance, in India, that then the members of the NAP and others in the industry have to object to such a political trend or such a decision, because it won't do any good basically for the reputation and the sustainability of the industry in the long run if workers' rights are diminished during a time of pandemic, but without any certainty that they will be restored. So I've learned that on the 22nd of May, for instance, trade unions around India have protested against these new policies. And as I said, I don't think it's in anybody's interest, certainly not in anybody that is involved in the fair trade system, that would take hold. Next one, please. Yeah, so Fairtrade actually has tried to be quick out of the gates in responding to the dramatic socioeconomic impact of the pandemic of producers and workers, as Sanjit just mentioned, by raising funds and establishing financial reserves to support producers and workers. For instance, the 2.1 million euros that was raised to establish a Fairtrade relief fund, and the additional 1 million euros for a Fairtrade resilience fund. And this is just the start, basically, of efforts to further grow these financial reserves that are meant to reduce and mitigate the impact of the pandemic on farmers and workers in such a way that can be used immediately and in the long run as well. And also the Fairtrade Standards Committee has decided to give full flexibility for workers to use Fairtrade Premium and use that, for instance, to support any income, as in the case of a loss of income or layoffs or what have you, or food supply and that kind of thing. So the most important thing, the most important priority for Fairtrade was to make money available to farmers and workers as soon as possible, to provide them with a buffer against the negative impact. Next one, please. Yeah, and so, and apart from financial support, as I described, we've also provided documentation and guidance materials that could be used for training and awareness raising with producers and workers around the ways of protecting them against infection with the virus, maintaining good health and safety practices, and so on and so forth. And this is an illustration of how that has happened. I think this is place in India where a number of smallholder farmers are gathered together to listen to somebody speaking about that and using these materials. Next one, please. Yeah, and of course, many estates and producers have to be commended for the efforts that they've put in place to keep workers safe, by making sure that people can maintain proper hygiene, that there's proper social distancing, and so on and so forth. So quickly these policies were established on the various, probably all of the estates in the Fairtrade system. And these are again a number of illustrations to bring that to life. Next one, please. Yeah, and so also at a global level, Fairtrade has stepped up to call on the international community, including the G20 countries, to make sure that support was given to the most vulnerable in global supply chains in order to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. And for instance, our CEO, Dario Soto Abril, has made a statement to the G20 that was being widely publicized. And also in terms of advocacy for farmers and workers, we are keenly aware that, you know, help must come also in the form of increased business and business revenue, income streams on the back of a larger volume of sales under Fairtrade terms. And therefore, a campaign was started called Fairtrade Together, in which a number of colleagues basically made statements on how important it is to show solidarity with vulnerable producers and workers and buy more tea and other products under Fairtrade terms. Thank you. Next one, please. In the meantime, the structural issues that have been plaguing the discussion about sustainability of the tea sector, they are not going away. They have not been forgotten, and Fairtrade and their producers are being reminded of them also in times of pandemic. You see a number of pictures here of either books or reports or documentaries that have come out in the last, let's say, the last decade on the issues that the socioeconomic issues that are affecting tea workers, particularly on the States, and with grievances basically raised regarding the impact of certification on labor conditions. And so the first one is a book by an author from the United States called Sarah Beskey, which is frequently referenced in all kinds of articles about socioeconomic issues on tea estates. So it really remains basically an important reference for people that write about it and say something about it. And then the second one is basically the documentary of the BBC that came out in 2015, and that raised a lot of noise. The third one, maybe you can go back if you don't mind. The third one is a report that has just been released by the University of Sheffield, again with respect to the conditions, labor conditions on tea estates and the impact that certifications are making on tea estates. So this is something that won't go away, and that requires basically a policy response, not only a communications response, but also a policy response, and not only from the Fairtrade international system through its standards and so on and so forth, but also very much from the industry itself. Next one, please. Yeah, so some of these issues that have been getting some critique regard to excuse me. Yeah, concern geographical hotspots around housing and sanitation, wage levels, and so on, but also the fact that that trade unions don't manage to adequately represent workers and activate workers at a local level. Then, of course, in fair trade, we have, I think, a big advantage towards other certifications schemes that, you know, there's fair trade premium available for workers, but we have to also recognize that that is linked to fair trade sales, and that fair trade sales are quite limited. And this is really a call, basically, again, on supply chains, on our partners in supply chains, in retailers, to make sure that the availability of fair trade tea and other products on the shelves of supermarkets will increase, so as to grow the consumption of these important products that will make an important difference to the lives of workers through fair trade premium. Of course, we have talked many times around on the issues of housing and the problem in the Northeast, that we have a large segment of the residents that is not employed, and basically places also financial strain on the estate owners. Having said that, not everything can be explained away so very easily. We still see significant differences in the cash wage levels, the daily wages between the Northeast and the South. And then I'm talking about difference between 167 rupees and, you know, wage levels of around 300 rupees and going beyond 300 rupees that are hard to explain when we also see that the tea prices for tea from the North are higher than from the South. So that also requires, basically, I think, as far as I'm concerned, a catch-up process, but also good thinking about, you know, how can we neutralize these differences as much as possible. Next one, please. Yeah, and then it is important to understand that certification is a contract with management of companies and not a contract with workers, and that places certification schemes for the challenge, that raises the challenge that certification schemes need to support workers and place workers at the heart of their systems. And so then the question is, how do you do that when the contract is with management and the relationship with workers is mediated through management? We want to, as Fairtrade, want to aspire to drive change beyond Fairtrade Premium. We want to do more, and our constitution is clear that it says that it wants to put workers and farmers more in control of their lives. So then the question is really, how do we do that? How do we avoid that we are a social compliance scheme or a tool for risk management used by buyers and brands, or a marketing tool used by the suppliers? These are important questions because they go to the heart of our impact on the lives of workers, and that will mainly, I'd say, determine the credibility of any certification system in the long run. So obviously, coming in here into the tea sector, and it already happened more than 20 years ago, I think there had to be more awareness of the fact that certification was entering basically an environment that was already heavily regulated, with deep-rooted structures and a long history basically of an industry. And so the question is really, how can we make sure that for the future certification can leave this positive footprint and provide added value, not only economically but also socially in the lives of workers? Next one, please. Now, there's not all bad news, and I think we have to be very careful that we don't accept just a negative framing of the tea sector when we read these critical reports or news messages or what have you. in the last few years, several studies were conducted into existing wage levels in comparison to the living wages of certain regions in the tea sectors of Sri Lanka and India, for instance. And the findings were actually surprisingly positive. This is a wage ladder from a report about the living wage that was estimated for the Nilgiris area in Tamil Nadu. And from this wage ladder, you see actually that the prevailing wages for tea workers are very close to what is considered to be the living wage. Even up to 90% of the living wage is paid in tea estates, which is very encouraging, I think, and also needs to be featuring more often, I think, in our communication about the tea sector and how it contributes to the lives of workers. Next one, please. Another study that was done a few years earlier is a living wage study for the Sri Lankan estate sector, which basically shows a similar picture of wages that sit quite close to the living wage at around, I think, about 88%, 90%. So again, quite close. It should be mentioned that this is a living wage estimation for the tea sector and not for the rural areas in Sri Lanka. Basically, we looked at the income differential between what workers receive and what they would need at the tea estates, where there are a lot of provisions available, services, etc., that are not available to ordinary agricultural workers outside of those estates. Again, positive news. Next one, please. And this is a study that was done also a few years earlier, not in relation to with a focus on the tea sector, but with a focus on the carpet weaving sector in Badoi in Uttar Pradesh. So giving attention basically to the difference between the living wage in Badoi in Uttar Pradesh and the income of own account workers. Nevertheless, this is probably the current the living wage benchmark that gets the closest to what can be considered an aspirational income level for the Northeast, because the economic conditions are more similar than between the Northeast and Tamil Nadu, or between the Northeast and Sri Lanka. So this is basically a living wage of around 10,000 rupees, which would translate in about, when you assume that a month is about 23 working days, about 462 rupees a day. Still a lot higher, obviously, than the daily wages currently earned by workers in the tea sectors of West Bengal and Assam. Next one, please. Yeah, so these are a few sort of topics that you know, I would love to have a more discussion about if the time permits. First of all, it appears to me that that you know, we have to recognize that the times that we are living in right now are unusual and put a tremendous strain on employers that will not permit basically a drastic increase in cost of production as a result of all kinds of social interventions at this very time, just because many sectors, including the tea sector, is fighting for its survival. We have to be realistic and we have to acknowledge that. At the same time, it remains important, and I believe also doable, to have a long, hard think about how can we make sure that certification places workers at its very heart, and make sure that we can put programs and measures in place that allow workers more control over their lives. And that would basically require that we take another look at our approach to certification, and not only adopt new changes in standards, implement new rules, but also reach a a new understanding between, for instance, Fairtrade and certified producers about what we want to achieve together and what we are all about. I think this is absolutely fundamental, that we go beyond rule setting and that we are basically going to reconsider the conceptual approach, the paradigm of certification in the tea sector, particularly in this case by Fairtrade, of course. And that dialogue, I think, is fundamental also for the long-term credibility of organizations such as Fairtrade in the tea sector. By only setting rules, I don't think we will get there, although standards remain a very important tool for standardized solutions. A few more things. I do believe, it is my view, that in the long run, certainly, or sooner than later, as far as economic conditions permit, the Northeast really has to catch up with the South on wage levels. It is problematic that there's still such a glaring discrepancy that cannot be explained away very easily. That we obviously work with the employers to help them bear the burden of housing, particularly when there's so many residents that are not engaged in productive employment on the estates. That we collaborate with other groups. Evidently, we're not alone in the world, and Fairtrade is not a big player in Assam, although much more significant in West Bengal. That we partner and collaborate with other groups, and you know probably who they are the certifiers, the multi-stakeholder initiatives. That we don't hide behind those processes and basically accept an indefinite delay of action. That is not acceptable, I think. That we work more on labor justice and trade justice to support workers through an increased revenue, more value that is passed on to their employers as a result of a redistribution of value. I think that is really critical, that Fairtrade steps up and says, look, we are about economic justice. More value needs to go to the producers so that we can also see social conditions improve. There's new opportunities. We have a tea standard review. There's a price review coming up. And of course, there's new industrial relations legislation in India, including a new minimum wage regulation and so on and so forth. And of course, this will raise all kinds of complexities, but I would say let's look for the action that we can take and that falls within our sphere of control, and come to a common understanding of what we're all about and what we hope to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wilbur. That was an impressive array of information contained in your presentation. And thank you also for assuring FT's commitment to improve the standard of living of the tea workers. Now, for a ringside view of the market during COVID times, I would like to introduce Amy Collins from Fairtrade Foundation UK. Amy has been working with Fairtrade Foundation since April 2018. She was originally in the business engagement team focusing on Fairtrade cotton. In that role, she worked closely with businesses to support them in sourcing Fairtrade cotton and in joining the Fairtrade system. She now works in the supply chain team as the UK tea supply chain manager and supports other supply chain colleagues on flowers. She will be talking about the current trends, challenges, and opportunities for FTT in UK market. She will also be talking about the adaptation and renewal strategies for FTT in the markets. Over to you, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranjit. Hi, everyone. Firstly, a big thank you to Nat for hosting the webinar and for inviting me to speak today. Also looking at the presentation, I think there may be a few formatting issues, so to apologise for those in advance. Now, this webinar comes at a really important time. We're continuing to review and develop our understanding of the immediate impacts of COVID-19 on individual farmers and workers, and on the mid to long-term impacts of the pandemic on global supply chains. Now, our immediate concern is on supporting farmers and workers through the crisis. However, it's important that we also use this opportunity to re-evaluate our current position in the market and to look at how we can adapt and progress our strategies to build a more sustainable tea trade moving forwards. Now, over the past few years, as Wilbur was touching on in the end of his presentation there has been growing collaboration and cooperation amongst stakeholders in the tea sector. It's very much seen that this is a fundamental step necessary in order to drive impact, improve wages, improve living and working conditions, and improve tea sales. And I think that COVID has once again demonstrated how important that collaboration is. Over the past few months, the Fairtrade Foundation has built and strengthened our relationships with existing partners, brands, retailers, and traders, as well as created new relationships. We've also obviously increased communication with our producer networks, with the producers, and with other NGOs and industry bodies as we look for collective ways to respond to the coronavirus crisis. I look forward to continuing with that spirit of cooperation and collaboration as we move forward in the wake of COVID-19. Now, as Ranjit introduced, I'm here today to give you all a bit of an overview of the fair trade tea market in the UK. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the key trends, opportunities and challenges, and also talk about our strategy and objectives for the sector. So starting off then with an overview. So the UK is the largest consumer of fair trade tea. In 2019, 426 metric tons were sold. That's about 60% of the global fair trade volumes. UK tea sales in 2019 generated just under 2.7 million euros in premium. Now, our primary market segment is through retail, so most sales are through supermarkets and other stockists. However, the out-of-home sector, so that's pubs, restaurants, hospitality, independent coffee shops, and other food establishments that are outside of the home, is a growing market segment. It's now around 15% of our UK fair trade sales. The graph on the bottom right that you can see here shows basically the relative importance of different sourcing origins to the UK market. And this was compiled using product level data, and there are a few gaps, so it's not comprehensive, but it is indicative of the number of sourcing origins that occur in UK supply chains. From this graph, we can see that India occurs the most commonly, but that Kenya, China, Rwanda, Malawi, Tanzania, and Sri Lanka are also very important sourcing origins as well. When we look at the UK tea market as a whole, fair trade represents only a small percentage, around 4% share. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Great. So before I turn to talk about the key trends and opportunities that we're seeing, I wanted to give a little insight into the impacts of COVID from the UK market perspective. So the UK government declared a lockdown on the 23rd of March, and all non-essential shops were closed and workers required to work from home. In the initial phases of the lockdown, we saw panic buying and stockpiling, and then gradual changes in consumer behaviour as people adapted to their new circumstances. So, for example, home baking really took off, and we saw increased sales of sugar, flour, and other home baking goods. Now, sales data for this period is not necessarily accurate. It's obviously conflated by that panic buying, stockpiling behaviour, and isn't necessarily representative of true market growth. However, it is interesting to note that in that period, we did see a 23% increase in take-home value across all fair trade certified products. Further, when we look specifically at tea, many of our commercial partners reported increases in tea sales, and we think that approximately consumption increased by 20% in that initial lockdown period. At the same time, we obviously have to balance this against the fact that for our out-of-home partners, many of these were closed entirely and therefore had significant losses of volumes. Now, on the 15th of June, non-essential shops reopened in the UK, and we've seen that sales have started to level out, and they're now broadly, as we would expect, on year-on-year levels. On the 4th of July, pubs, restaurants, and hospitality and leisure facilities started to reopen, and we expect that out-of-home volumes will gradually begin to increase now as consumer confidence returns and people begin to once again visit out-of-home establishments. Next slide, please. Okay, so turning to some of the more general UK tea market trends, which we expect to continue in a post-COVID landscape. Our biggest challenge is declining demand, and that's not intrinsic to fair trade tea. That's an issue within the sort of tea market generally. So retail tea volumes saw a 3% year-on-year decline in both 2018 and 2019. I understand this is a trend which is mirrored in other traditional consumer markets. But in the UK, there are a few factors which do help to offset this trend. So firstly, within that same period, value spend increased, particularly on specialty teas, which increased by 4.2% in 2019. What this means is that while consumers may be in general buying less volumes of tea, the tea they are buying, they're prepared to pay a bit more for. The second factor which helps to offset the declines is that if we look specifically at the fair trade tea volumes, we can see that sales were relatively stable. We had less than a 1% decline. This indicates that amongst fair trade tea consumers, there is continued preference and loyalty. A third factor is that out-of-home tea sales are increasing. So the out-of-home sector has largely been dominated by coffee sales. However, tea now represents around 4.4% of the UK specialised coffee shop segment, which is still small, but it is growing. In fact, in 2019, that represents a growth of around 9%. Now, the first and third of these factors, I think, are indicative of changing consumer preferences. What we're seeing is that premium, specialty and herbal teas are capturing a larger market share and a larger market value. And I think that that's where there are potentially some opportunities for fair trade. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in general, black tea breakfast blends remain the most popular amongst British consumers. In a survey last year, UK consumers identified that quality and taste are the most important factors in their tea buying decision. So you can see in the graph on the bottom left that taste, then quality, and then price were the sort of key factors that consumers take into account. For fair trade, this is really important to understand that actually for consumers, the quality and taste profile of a tea is more likely to influence their buying decision, perhaps indicating less price sensitivity than we might expect. Another interesting thing is that 71% of our consumers think that ethical certification is important. So these are consumers answering very important, quite important, or slightly important when asked how important is it to you that your tea is certified by an ethical trading body such as Fairtrade. Now, this is a very high percentage. What's more, if we look at a demographic by age, we can see that sustainable sourcing is particularly important to younger consumers. So again, potential opportunities to engage new audiences. Next slide, please. So whilst traditional black tea remains the most popular product, as I've sort of touched on briefly, we are seeing increased innovation and new product development in the tea sector. This is engaging new consumer audiences and creating more market segmentation. And I'll just go through a few examples here. So one, we're seeing more luxury and high-end tea brands emerging. These tend to use different marketing and engagement strategies, particularly over social media. We often see the creation of bespoke themed teas, tea events, and tea pairings at exclusive restaurants is a new trend. Now, these sort of brands, as I say, tend to use social media to be able to tell the stories behind the teas. Again, from a fair trade perspective, this is obviously an area where we have a lot of expertise and a lot of experience in doing that, and being able to really talk about the farmers and workers who are growing our tea stories. So this is a real opportunity, I think, for us to be able to tap into some of these higher end and luxury brands. Now, because of the success of these kind of brands, it's also had the impact of changing consumers' willingness to pay. So a survey last year found that consumers are now prepared to pay, on average, 2.5 times the amount for a premium or specialty tea compared with a standard breakfast blend. And this is particularly true in an out-of-home setting, so if someone has gone out to a coffee shop. A second area of innovation is in the realm of iced teas. Now, iced drinks are seeing massive growth. This is primarily through iced coffees and cold brews. However, iced tea sales are also growing, and they're expected to continue to grow over the next 2 to 3 years. In the UK, we currently work with 2 iced tea brands, and we do have some retailers who also have developed their own brand cold brew tea bags and tea infusions. Again, this is a sector that I expect we will see some more growth over the next few years in. A third area is health and wellness. This continues to be an important topic and sector for UK consumers. The impact of this from a tea perspective is increased demand for green and herbal teas and teas with particular health benefits. And then a final and relatively new innovation has been a move towards combining tea with alcoholic spirits. So we've had some Earl Grey gins and oolong whiskies start to occur and appear in the marketplace. Now, these innovations and new segments, as I've mentioned, present new opportunities for us to promote fair trade tea and grow tea sales. Apologies here for the bad formatting on this slide. Now, Fairtrade is in a good position to be able to do this. The UK market for ethical products continues to grow. It's nearly quadrupled over the last 2 decades. Now, within that, the ethical food and drink segment has shown the strongest growth, and in 2018 was valued at £12 billion. Within the ethical segment, Fairtrade continues to hold a strong position of trust and awareness amongst British consumers. And this data here is from our Q2 2020 market research, and it shows that 91% of people have seen the Fairtrade mark. 75% of people say they care about Fairtrade. 78% of people trust the Fairtrade mark, and 27% actively choose Fairtrade products always or often. Next slide, please. Great. So in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to talk through some of our objectives and strategies for capturing a greater share of the market, particularly as we move forward in the wake of COVID-19. I think it's important to note that Fairtrade International is currently reviewing the global fair trade strategy, and so there may be new strategic aims and objectives for different commodities that come out of that as well. But this is very much sort of from our perspective in the UK, some of the key areas that we think will help us to drive impact and to drive growth moving forwards. So key to our strategy, I think, is relationships. Now, as I touched on at the beginning, over the past few months, we've really strengthened our relationships with existing commercial partners, industry bodies, and within the fair trade system. We've had huge sort of engagement with the producer networks, with NAP, who have really helped us to have knowledge exchange and information sharing throughout the supply chain, so that we've been able to respond to COVID and sort of provide updates to our partners. And I think that this sort of spirit of collaboration and cooperation, which has always been there in fair trade, but obviously through COVID, we've really seen how fundamental and critical that is. And I think that keeping that in mind as we move forward is going to really be the best opportunity for us to be able to together drive impact and sort of increase fair trade tea volumes. A second pillar is very much around communication. That's connected to the first, but also refers to our messaging. So we need to continue to communicate fair trade's value and impact, both in our own fair trade messaging, but also by supporting our partners in their messaging to consumers. Now, as I spoke about with regards to the premium and high-end teas, the ability to be able to tell the stories behind the tea is something that is very important in our market, and it's something that really engages consumers and increases consumer commitment. So that's an area where we need to continue to do that, to provide new resources and new stories to engage our customers. A key other part of our sort of strategy is our advocacy and policy work. Now, Wilbert's already touched on some of this in relation to living wages, and that's something that continues to be critically important within tea. And the UK sort of advocacy strategy for living wages is in tea will be developed towards the end of this year, and really looks to engage commercial partners and industry stakeholders and set out concrete actions and recommendations that we can take to move towards achieving higher wages within the tea sector. In addition to our advocacy work, we're also looking to drive impact through our certification systems. So again, as Wilbur touched on, we currently have the tea standard and tea pricing review, and we're very much looking to engage our stakeholders in that process and bring them forwards to sort of strengthen the standards and make improvements for workers. And then a final part of our sort of market strategy very much touches on the innovations that I've just talked through. I think it's really important that we, as Fairtrade, manage to adapt to these new market trends, changing circumstances, and find ways to sort of continually make Fairtrade relevant to those and promote Fairtrade both with existing partners and by prospecting into these new market segments and to new business partners too. And then on to the final slide, please. So if we can go to the fun, thank you. So finally, I wanted to provide some more information on our work to drive impact specifically in Northeast India. Now, Northeast India remains a challenging context due to the complex regulatory landscape and the chronic and long-standing issues around workers' living and working conditions. I think COVID has really underlined how fragile workers' livelihoods are. But again, as I said at the beginning, it also presents us with an opportunity to look at how we can move forward to bring about a more sustainable tea trade as we progress beyond coronavirus. Now, in the middle of last year, we commissioned research to help us to understand the challenges and blockers to achieving higher wages in Northeast India. A key part of this was to help us to understand the changing regulatory landscape. There's a lot of reforms that are currently in motion. And to capture workers' perspectives on this topic. Now, as a result of COVID, we've had to postpone the field-based part of the research. However, an initial report has been prepared outlining some of the key challenges and recommendations. That is due to be published in the next few months. Now, this report will inform our advocacy strategy, and in the coming months, we will be engaging industry-wide stakeholders and our commercial partners and identifying key actions that can be taken towards improving workers' living conditions and wages. Now, the report also highlights the ongoing need to support worker empowerment, and in the next phase of our Northeast India strategy, we will be looking to explore partnerships and funding opportunities for programmatic approaches so that we can really deepen our impact. That's sort of a very whistle-stop tour of the key trends, challenges and opportunities in the UK market and some of our strategic objectives for the next sort of few years. In summary, I guess I would say that the UK remains an important tea market and we have many committed partners and customers who value and recognise the importance of fair trade, particularly in the wake of COVID-19. I think as we adapt and look to move forwards, our focus should be on growing fair trade tea sales and driving impact for workers and farmers through our partnerships, communication, advocacy and programmatic work streams. And I hope that those are various things that we can continue to work on together with all of the sort of people that are participating in this webinar. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to any questions at the end.
Thank you, Amy, for an excellent presentation on tea market trends in the UK. Heartening to know that quality, ethics, and sustainability are growth drivers. Innovations like premium teas, iced teas, tea for health, alcoholic tea beverages. It's very interesting. Hope some of it can be replicated in other markets too. Now it's time to hear the producer's voice as to how they have been coping up with the COVID. First on the list is a distinguished planter from South India, Mr. TGB Pinto. Mr. TGB Pinto is the director of the board of United Nilgiri Tea Estates and Company Limited, with an experience of 39 years in plantations. He has been the chairman of the Nilgiri Planters Association and Planters Association of Tamil Nadu for 2 years. He's presently in the executive committee of the United Planters Association of South India, or UPASI, as it's commonly called. We'll be talking about how the producers are rebuilding their local and global supply chains given the pandemic effects. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you, gentlemen, for giving me this opportunity to participate in this webinar. Now, I will speak primarily on South India. Now, can I have the first slide?
Just move your cursor to the left.
Yeah. Yes. Now, out of 1,400 million kilograms which India produces, South India produces just about 240 million. Over a period of time, because there are a lot of gardens which are not doing well and have closed down, it has now come to about 220. Some of the estates have been closed and not been reopened. Yeah. The second slide, please. Now, while the total North Indian production has gone up, this is basically probably because Gautam will probably speak on this. It is primarily because of small growers. Yeah, next slide, please. Now, if you look at all India production, from just 1,000 million kilograms in 2013, we have gone up by 40% in 2019. That is on an all India basis. Now, there's been a continuous increase in production. Yeah, I'm just going through the statistics as fast as possible. Yeah, can I have the next? Yes. Now, if you see the local in producing countries, Kenya is one country which has shown a tremendous increase. And this is actually affecting exports from South India, because some of the markets, when Kenya started producing orthodox teas, they have Nilgiri teas have been replaced by Kenyan teas. And today, Kenyan tea prices are the lowest for the last 5 years. And there's a direct competition in price between Nilgiris and Kenyan. Kenyan teas are much stronger. They have an advantage of elevation. They have an advantage of rainfall most of the year, which Nilgiris and most of the South India doesn't have. We go through extended drought periods, and this affects production. Yeah, next slide, please. One of the saving grace for India, and especially South India, has been an increase in consumption. From just 900 million kilograms in 2013, we are now consuming over 1,100 kilograms. So the local demand is very, very high. Unfortunately, because of this, the thrust on quality and exports is not as it should be. Yeah, next slide, please.
Sir, can I just ask you to switch on your request you to switch on your webcam, sir? You're not visible.
Webcam.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Now, on the next slide, I've given global consumption country-wise, which helps us to find out exactly which are the countries which have actually increased in consumption, right? Starting from United Kingdom to Japan. Now, most of these countries, the tea consumption actually has stagnated world over. There are a few places like US or UK, which have shown marginal increases. The biggest increase is actually Pakistan, and India supplies a minuscule quantity to Pakistan. Most of it comes from Kenya, where overall, in other smaller countries, the tea consumption has actually increased. They're mostly Southeast Asian countries and some of the African countries. Yeah, next slide, please. No, please continue with this slide. Now, while our cost of production is going up, we have not been able to match this with increased price realization for tea. You can see the difference between 2013 to 2019. It has just gone up by 20 rupees on an average per kilo. And cost of production has actually doubled during this period, over 6 years. So there's a lot of stress levels for companies to survive. That's one of the reasons most South Indian companies have a problem. I'm not sure about North Indian. Probably Gautam will help you out. One of the saving cases is people who have been in exports. Because of rupee depreciation, the price realization for teas has gone up. And this has been a saving grace, especially in Nilgiri planters, where most of the tea is exported. Yeah, next slide, please. Now, these are export details. You've got separate figures for North India, South India, and all India. Now, whereas you see South India, we are less than 200 million kilograms, whereas at one time we were 250 million. Russia was a big market, and after USSR got into smaller countries, we lost a very big market. Close to 60% of the Nilgiri teas and South Indian Orthodox were all going to Russia. So we had to try and get other markets. So it's only in the last few years, US has been buying slightly more South Indian teas, primarily for the iced tea market. Yeah, next one. Next slide, please. Now this gives you an export details in terms of number of million kilograms you have exported this year, the export value. And I'll come to a last slide, which actually shows there's a huge drop in exports because of COVID. Okay, next slide. Now, South India, we had this unannounced lockouts suddenly, which came in overnight. So this year, if you take the figure from January to June, we are down by close to 20 million kilograms. And in value terms, this is about 220 crore rupees. This is affecting all the tea companies in the South. We are all working at 75% capacities with 50% workforce. And this is resulting in a huge increase in cost of production. The price realization has only moved up in the last 1 or 2 weeks. It was much below cost of production most of March, April, and May. Now I'll come on to the challenges which we have had because of the lockdown and ban on interstate movement of goods. Most of the time we just couldn't send our teas for export. And second is, even locally, you have to get an e-pass for the lorry movement. From one part of a district to another part of the district, you couldn't move even green leaf. So this affected us a lot. Some of the companies had to sell green leaf at rock bottom prices. Auctions were not being held in Cochin. So we had huge stocks in the go down. We had huge stocks in the factory. Our schools were closed, crushes were closed. Now, some companies during the lockdown period have paid wages out of their own funds. Some are still discussing with their labor unions. But generally, there's not been a consensus about what exactly has to be done. Because primary focus was on to pay wages for the days they've worked. Because a lot of companies had a cash flow problem. Now, for example, UNT, we did pay wages during the lockdown period. But we spoke to the government and we were able to get an exemption, being an agriculture industry, that we could be able to start earlier. And Nilgiri is one of the first places where we could start. Kerala, South India and Kerala had some problem. They started about 10 or 15 days later. Next slide, please. Now, most estates have got 50% migrant labor. With the total ban on transport, railways, there was a huge, some of them had gone, some of them couldn't come back. And people who were here, who are wanting to go to their native places on leave, couldn't. So most of the leave was, they had utilized it to stay at home. Now, this gave us a lot of challenge. With the lack of movement of goods, we couldn't move vegetables, we couldn't move rice. So we had to get special permissions from the government to buy rice, buy vegetables, and distribute it to the workers. We have used some of the Fairtrade funds to give them dry rations, like pulses, cereals, oil, and some spices. Vegetables we couldn't, but we managed to get locally grown vegetables to be delivered to their doorstep. Now, with the quarantine, where movement outside the estate was difficult, we had a big problem, because if there was an infection within the estate, that would have spread rapidly. So all tea companies in the south had to get in standard operating procedures for COVID-19. We made sure that we had this sprays done every 3 days on around all dwellings. We gave them hand sanitizers. We provided masks. Then we had soap, water kept in different places, because when they started work, they had to wash their hands. Safe distancing was implemented. And this resulted in much lower productivity compared to earlier years. Most of the companies had to bear this cost. Now, we had to follow up this SOPs and safety protocol, because we had to do it all the time. Every day we had to monitor. People had to assemble, we had to check their temperatures, we had bought oximeters to check their oxygen saturation. And luckily, till today, we have not had any cases of COVID in any tea plantations. We do not know. The villages around tea companies are getting infected, and it is slowly creeping to our doorstep. In one of the estates, where the hospital was open for the public, 2 of the people from the villages died and they were tested positive. So the hospital had to be closed, which means our workers could not avail hospital facilities. Now we have tried to overcome this, where the division clinics had to take up extra responsibilities. And in certain cases, some of the suspected cases, you have to shift them to nearby towns where there was a government quarantine. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things which all estates, I would recommend that we should also do is, we should have our own COVID test kits, because we are all based in rural areas. Access to cities, access to towns is very difficult. There's no public transport. There are no cabs. So hence, in case of an emergency, we should be able to test and we should be able to quarantine. All of us should monitor on a daily basis our workers' health. Then some of us have provided one-time ex gratia for those people who couldn't come. And to all the children who could not come to the crush, we have provided high protein powder so that they could use it in their houses. Now, some estates have got ambulances, which also could be doubled up as mobile clinics. Now, another big problem is we have a huge number of children and they're all at home. There is no way you can have online classes. You have problems, they do not have computers. And plus this internet connectivity is very, very poor. It's not reliable at all. So we are now speaking to the government whether they can make ad hoc arrangements. Some of the Fairtrade funds can be used for buying computers, and also with the government to see whether internet continuity can be given. Now, the biggest challenge is during this time, unless we produce quality, we will never be able to sustain. The quantity of leaf in the factories was less, so probably most tea companies, the quality parameters have gone up. Now, South India, especially Nilgiris and certain parts of Tamil Nadu, we have been deficient in rainfall. Some of the estates have worked only for 5 days. And they've given advanced leave which was supposed to be given end of the year. They're given in advance. Now, this takes a toll on the production levels. Like I've told you, we're already down 20 million. In July alone, that figure will go up significantly. Next slide, please. Now, what we have seen, especially in UK and Europe, these are hot tea drinking countries, and they have been buying a lot of orthodox teas. Whereas, and a lot of people use hot tea in their houses. So that's one of the reasons house consumption of tea has gone up. Whereas in the US, which is a predominantly iced tea market, which is normally drunk in restaurants, the iced tea business has dropped significantly. In certain parts of US, especially northern USA and in Canada, you have areas where the hot tea beverages consumption is high, and those areas they've been buying more tea. Yeah, thank you. Probably.
Thank you, sir, for such an informative presentation. It carried a wealth of information for the downstream stakeholders specifically. The suggestions are noted, and we are very heartened to see the measures that you've taken for your workers. Now, the next speaker is Mr. Gautam Mohan, who is the director of the Tea Promoter India. He will speak about the tea industry in Northeast India. A graduate from the prestigious London School of Economics,
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm representing Tea Promoters India. Tea Promoters owns and manages gardens across India, starting with Darjeeling, Assam, Doas, and also the south of India. We solely focus on growing organic and fair trade teas, and we've been doing this for the last 30 years. Can you move to the next slide, please? Can you move to the slide after this? So these are some of the tea growing regions where we work in. Apart from managing tea gardens, we've also been a pioneer, I would say, in the small farmer tea cooperative movement in India. We manage several small farmer projects in the south and the northeast of India, all organic and fair trade certified, and this is something unusual for tea. Next slide, please. Can you switch? Yeah. Can you keep on moving the slides often enough? Yeah, so switch to the next slide. Right, so since we're talking about COVID, and I think I'm the last panelist or one of the last panelists to speak, I must say it's been a very enriching discussion, and there have been some really interesting points shared by Wilbert, Amy, and Mr. Pinto. One of the disadvantages of speaking at the end is that most of my the topics I was going to also share, some of the COVID prevention work we've done in the tea gardens have been already mentioned by Mr. Pinto. So I'll try to uh, uh, just add on to some of the points that he had mentioned. So at the production level in North and Northeast India, similar to the South of India and other tea growing regions, we've been badly hit. The figures for Assam are almost a 50% crop loss. In Darjeeling, we are looking today at a 30% crop loss. And one has to remember that this is not just absolute numbers, there's also a monetary value to this. The monetary value being that the first half of the year produces the better quality teas, your first flush and second flush. Second flush being crucial for Assam, first flush being very important for Darjeeling. And this has been hit. This is not only been a quantitative loss, but also a qualitative loss for tea gardens. Again, this was coming off the winter months where you're running your operations on limited cash flows as there's no production. In Darjeeling, there's almost 5 months of a lull in production. In Assam, it's 3 to 4 months. And then we had this extended period of closure, lockdown in the month of March in India. And there have been sporadic disruptions ever since we have opened in late April. So production has been hit, and it has severely dented the cash flows of all tea companies. I think this is fairly uniform for all of us. So that's of course been the first challenge. The second challenge that and I would like to focus on this point particularly more than the limitations of having infrastructure with you in these remote tea growing regions has been the challenge of raising awareness. The COVID pandemic has really created a heightened sense of panic, especially in rural areas. And this is a combination of people being highly distrustful of the physical medical infrastructure available in rural areas, and also a considerable amount of uh, poor information, misinformation being circulated through social media on COVID. This panic has not only led to a higher absenteeism in our tea gardens, but this has also led to a considerable amount of social changes that we are seeing, and I would like to focus on 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 the social and behavioral and the societal changes that we are currently noticing in our tea gardens. So a big part of this change is the sheer stigma that COVID is bringing. In our gardens, in the initial months of March and April, we realized that both Darjeeling and Assam, being slightly more distant, almost a little disconnected from mainland India, had protected itself fairly well from COVID. There weren't that many cases, certainly only a few cases in tea areas. But as things inevitably opened up and we saw this huge flux of migrants, so people, especially the younger generation that are living in the tea gardens and are working in the largest cities in India, when they started coming back due to the job losses that we have seen in the big Indian cities, there was this huge panic and stigma against migrants and outsiders coming back into the villages in our tea garden. This has not only changed the social fabric. There are, of course, undertones of caste-related violences, the sheer stigma and the harrowing experience that a lot of migrants have had to go through while being put in a quarantined environment, access to drinking water, access to food, electricity. The quarantining has stretched for even up to a month. In a remote part of the gardens, these quarantine structures have been made by the local village committees. Even after a person has finished quarantining, we're seeing that the stigma has persisted with that particular person in the villages once he has joined normal family life. I also feel there's a huge misinformation of what COVID is, how serious or not so serious it can be for certain stratas, certain age groups. There is almost a fear that this is a disease on the lines of rabies or HIV, and it's this huge misinformation that I think we've been trying to control and sort of disseminate correct factual information on what it takes to prevent yourself from getting COVID. And after a person has COVID, it only takes up to 2 weeks for them to, and now results are showing just almost a week for them to not remain infectious. So social stigmatization in our gardens have been tackled through the committees we have. Our fair trade committees have been playing active roles. The village committees in the northeast, you call them Samaj, they have been playing a proactive role. And just to touch on another topic here, in the months of March and April, when our tea gardens were shut, undeniably there were incidents of greater levels of alcoholism and, as a result, sexual harassment. And we know for a fact that in our tea gardens, the committees that deal with sexual harassment cases were extremely proactive. And this is when you see these structures and systems come into play and be helpful. And of course, these capacities have been built over many years now. We've been fair trade now for 25 years. And you're really seeing the benefits of some of these structures. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits that or the support that we have received from Fairtrade. There's also feedback here. Fairtrade did allow the Fairtrade committees to buy essential commodities and disburse it to families in need, especially during the severe lockdown in March that India had witnessed. There was a complete disruption of the supply chain, especially in these remote areas and regions. Flow had also allowed cash disbursements to hired labor, which is, as far as I know, a very rare exception. I'm aware that several tea producing organizations have availed this, which is supposed to show that it's come in handy. There was initially a little bit of, I wouldn't call it bureaucracy, but a little bit of paperwork that was expected from us, which was receipts that would be required for future audits of these purchases. In rural areas, with markets being extremely informal, receiving formal receipts are a challenge, but we gave that feedback to Flow and received their acknowledgement and support in tackling this problem. So yeah, apart from the awareness, capacity building, that we continue doing in our gardens to avoid the stigma and disseminate the right information on COVID and its precautions. We have also continuously distributed masks. There is a direct connection between, we have noticed, between the wearing of masks in tea gardens and the information or the panic that newspapers create. So we have, from our company's funds, been supplying masks on almost on a weekly basis, and I've been very strict on this. I do feel that the communities, the tea communities in the Northeast have extreme resilience, which we are seeing through this COVID crisis. When during the lockdown in India, you could see a lot of urban poor facing hunger issues. What we realized in the hill regions of Darjeeling was that stocking up on food, potatoes and rice for at least 3 months was a very normal thing. So the suffering wasn't as much. So just to summarize some of the rebuilding efforts that I've started, one would definitely be to continue the capacity building, continue supplying the protective equipments. These communities themselves are very resilient, which is always a strength. They're close communities, so monitoring is also a little more easier. And on the market front, and that's my last slide, I think this has also been spoken about in detail by the earlier panelists. I will say that a lot of the work has gone online, and I think that's across industries. We are seeing demand not as strong as previous years. In the export market, the domestic market of India has behaved differently, and that's purely because there's a huge shortage of teas. In the export markets, because most of the Darjeeling and Assam teas, especially in the orthodox, the leaf sector in which we deal in, are from the luxury market, we are expecting a reduction in demand. It will only time will tell us whether organic and fair trade certified teas will see a greater glut in demand. During the lockdown, when there was this global wave of lockdowns, we always wondered whether something like a whiskey would be our greatest competitor. But I think hearing from Amy, I'm a little relieved that both tea and alcohol can complement each other from the tea cocktails and the increase in demand that you had mentioned. So all in all, from a demand perspective and how this year will hold, I think it's too early to say. The logistical challenges that Mr. Pinto mentioned haven't made it easier. Transportation is taking a long time. There aren't enough containers around in our ports. Document processing in the banks are taking a while. So yes, these are challenging times, and we can just keep our fingers crossed that demand wouldn't collapse too severely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gautam Mohan, for a nice presentation, and happy to note that your estates have already started aligning to the new normal. Next in the list is another distinguished personality, Professor Abhay Gunawardene, former professor in environmental economics of Texas A&M University in USA. He is currently the managing director and CEO of Ahimsa Teas, Sri Lanka. He is also the representative of Aluwana Hitakara Organic Tea Growers Society. He will be talking about the on-ground challenges from a Sri Lankan perspective. He's been facing some technical challenges due to internet issues. Professor, I think you will have to unmute yourself. Professor, can you hear me? Professor, can you hear us? I think there's another technical challenge and he may probably join us a little later. In the meantime, I have got requests for sharing the presentation, all the presentations that have been made today. We will do so, but after getting the due consent of the speakers. Also, the recording of this webinar would be put on in YouTube by Friday. So anyone who has missed it can check there. I think since we will take some time getting Professor Abhay Gunawardene on back, we will start with the questions. So the first question is for Mr. Sanjeet Singh Khurana. It is from Prasenjit Banerjee. What is fair trade? Sanjit?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, so I think I've got a couple of questions which are related to the same topic regarding the funds, the relief, as well as the resilience funds. So let me just give a brief on how these came about. The two basic funds what we're talking about here are separate in the sense like the contributors to the relief fund are basically the Fairtrade International themselves, as well as NAP. Whereas for the resilience funds, we have our other stakeholders, NFOs and other donor agencies, even governmental agencies. And basically the usage of these funds are, for the relief fund is supposed to be used for emergency relief operations. And the resilience fund is basically to help develop the production capacities. And it is more based on needs assessment. So in NAP, what we did was that for the relief fund, we realized that having a needs assessment would be very cumbersome. Knowing that the challenges are unique, we are not able to travel, we are not able to assess exactly what the impact this pandemic has had on individual producer members. But also we realize that each and every member in each and every country and region has been impacted in some way or the other. And also their needs have changed over a period of time. Initially, of course, it was, to start off with food, more related to food and healthcare. And then later on, it moved on to other issues as well. So what we decided was we'll have an equitable approach in dispersing the relief fund, which is currently underway. Most of the applications have been received, have been processed and been followed up, and we are following it up with Fairtrade International for releasing the funds. There has been a particular challenge for the Indian producer members, which is basically due to the Foreign Exchange Regulation Acts and the FCRA and the FEMA. So we are currently working on that, but I think very soon we should be able to start getting these funds into the accounts of the producer members, into their FTP funds. Coming to the other question of the production capacities development, like I said, the resilience fund is basically going to focus on the particular needs for which we have already reached out to a lot of our producer members through our consultants. They have been interacting with the members to find out what exactly is required to help them come back to the position what they were in before this pandemic hit. And we've got applications. Our core team, which is assessing these requirements and applications, will be shortlisting, and depending on the amount of fund available, we will be dispersing it. Apart from these two funds, we've also, I would like to say that, we are very, very grateful to a lot of our other donor agencies and partners who have come up alongside parallelly to offer their support. And there are certain funds that are being offered. Some of them are restricted in the sense to certain regions or certain products, but most of them are unrestricted. And the exercise what we are undertaking on the needs assessment will help us decide as to who requires these funds based on their the severity of the impact on priority basis. The second question also, I think, which I will take is regarding the premium use, the Fairtrade premium use. As you all know, we were taken by surprise initially, but I must say that all the stakeholders of Fairtrade, including FlowCert as well as NAP, we were quite adaptive and agile and very flexible. And there were a set of waivers that were given for the use, limiting the use of this Fairtrade premium. Like even Gautam mentioned that FlowCert has been very, very flexible to address certain issues, and which has also helped the small producers who are not able to meet the audit requirements to be able to tap into this particular fund. Yes, there is another request or suggestions basically from the HL hired labor sector, is that whether we can use these funds for something like meeting the statutory requirements, government statutory requirements, and housing, etc. I think it will be good if there is a written representation in this regard, and certainly we will take it up with FlowCert in their assessment. The meeting coming up in the next couple of weeks, we will put this up, and we will have to see how it fits into the whole scheme of things. But yes, if there are any suggestions in this regard, kindly reach out to us as well as to FlowCert, and then we will take it up with them. I hope I've answered these 2 points. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sanjeet. I think we have re-established a connection with Professor Abhay Gunawardene. So I request Professor Gunawardene to carry on with this presentation. Professor Gunawardene?
Hello, could you hear me? I could hear you.
Yes, you're audible. You're audible, Professor. Please carry on.
Okay. What I will do is that I will very quickly summarize in few points what I intended to present as my presentation. Without going by slide, I will mention few important points since I have a very weak connection. First thing I want to mention is that everybody was affected negatively with COVID-19. Among the tea sector stakeholders, processors or the factory owners or the factories are the most affected, or severely or adversely most affected are the factories community. For example, farmers or the leaf producers get some the return back when there is sales. Exporters can adjust their exports according to the orders coming in, and of course they buy from the auction or otherwise. And then of course the brokers and the other groups, they have, I'm not saying that they are doing wonderful, but some juice they can get for their survival. But the factories are faced with unexpected or highly uncertain leaf coming in, and also highly unexpected or uncertain output sales, made tea sales. In Sri Lanka, pre-COVID-19 situation was very bad. There was a 4 to 5 months severe drought. Our total production, the auction per week was about 6 metric tons per week on average, or say 4 to 6 tons. This was reduced to about 1 metric tons the first week of automated auction introduction. Then it was increased to 2 metric tons, and then 3 metric tons per week. I mean 3 million metric tons. I'm sorry, the million word has to be added. And then now the overall production is around 4 to 5 million metric tons per week. Despite all the difficulties, the rain has been reasonably good and the production is coming, and the prices have gone down, but it has come to a certain stable level. And the exports have cut down or gone down. And then, as one of the speakers was mentioning, the quality of the product has become very, very important. In summary, I'm not going to elaborate all these facts. In summary, everyone was negatively affected, but the factory, I would say at least even in Sri Lanka, maybe about 30–40% factories have been closed down completely. I mean, it will be very difficult for them to come back to production under the present financial conditions or financial situation, and also the export sales and all those negative trends occurring in the sector. Therefore, in summary, Sri Lankan tea sector survived. Auction was made automated, but the workers were suffering a lot, and the smallholder leaf suppliers were suffering, and the factory or the processing side was suffering the most, and then exporters were also faced with the decline demand as well as lowering prices. That is what, in summary, I could share at this point. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Ranjit, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Sanjit. Yeah. Thank you, Professor. I'm sorry we had to face all those technical issues. So now we move to the next session, which is the question answer session. And there's a question from Catherine Gasser to Amy Collis. Could someone please also refer to the recent development of the transparent supply chain law? Please also make a point that all tea workers are although tea workers are paid more in South India than North India, it is significantly below a living wage level. Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, Ranjit. Yeah, we heard you.
Yeah, so this is for Amy Collis. Amy, are you online?
There we go. Yeah, thanks, Ranjit. It just took a minute for it
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please, if you could.
Do you want me to repeat the question? Yeah.
Yes.
Could
yeah.
someone please also refer to the recent development of the transparent supply chain law?
So I'm not entirely sure what law is being referred to in this question. Obviously, from a UK and European perspective, there's been some changes that we have then, particularly with mass balance, so for tea as a product that is often traded in that way, that we've had to take sort of measures to implement. So we now have different messaging on pack and sort of make that more explicit about the sort of supply chain information relating to the end product. But I'm not sure if the question was relating to anything more specific than that. And then I think you also touched on the issue of wage differential between North and South India. I mean, I think this is something that Wilbur can and did speak to, in a lot more detail, but certainly from a UK perspective, we're just very aware that Northeast India is a particularly challenging context, and it's an area where the sort of wage disparity is particularly pronounced. And that's sort of where there's a big focus sort of in our work and in our advocacy to really try to understand what sort of specifically within that area. So that's sort of the regulatory context with the Plantation Labour Act, and also the sort of historical and contextual issues within that region that make it such a difficult place to sort of try and achieve higher wages. And then I guess there's the nuances around sort of how the value is distributed within the supply chain. So there's many different factors I think that go into why there is that disparity. And I'm not sure, perhaps Wilbur would like to sort of pick up on that latter part of the question in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Amy. There's another question for you, and this is from Harjinder Singh Kapoor. We note that the FD market share for tea is only 4%. This provides a good opportunity to scale up. Would like to know how FI plans to do so. Yeah,
so certainly within the UK, Fairtrade represents around 4% of the tea market. So it is small, but as I sort of mentioned in the presentation, it is a loyal share. It is sort of, it's remained stable over the preceding few years. Again, as I also mentioned, the Fairtrade International are developing their next 5-year strategy, and that will potentially have new objectives for different commodities. But certainly at the UK level, our sort of main priorities are to protect our existing volumes, So particularly with sort of being aware that there are these sort of global changes in consumer preferences and declines in the sales of tea, we're sort of really prioritising making sure that our existing volumes are protected, working very closely with our commercial partners, brands and retailers and the traders, to then also look for avenues to try and increase and grow fair trade volumes. I think it's, you know, a difficult marketplace. Obviously, we've got other certification bodies out there, and that's where a big focus for us is really on ensuring that we continue to highlight and talk about the value and importance and impact of fair trade, particularly, you know, within tea. And again, this is why it's also important that we do, you know, proceed with our advocacy work and with the programmatic interventions. To do that, as I mentioned, we need collaboration, and we need to be able to work with partners and find funding opportunities to be able to do all of that. But yes, the sort of relatively low market share is obviously one big factor, and something that we continue to sort of work to try to improve that figure. And yeah, again, very happy to sort of engage with any other industry bodies or stakeholders that are also working to, you know, sort of drive tea sales and, you know, explore ways that we can perhaps try and adapt and respond to that issue.
Amit, there's another question for you, and this is with regard to the fair trade advocacy project in the pipeline, especially for Northeast India. Is there any advocacy project in pipeline for the fair trade tea sectors in India?
Yeah,
so you were talking about.
Yeah, so the research report that we commissioned in the middle of last year, as I mentioned in my presentation, was very much looking at some of the regulatory challenges and blockers to achieving higher wages in Northeast India particularly. Now, a key part of that research was meant to have and to capture the workers' perspective. As a result of COVID-19, that unfortunately hasn't been possible, although we hope to be able to return to that perhaps next year, depending on how the situation progresses. But the initial report has been completed. That's sort of it. Really looks at some of the long-standing historical regulatory and sort of contextual factors, so things like the Plantation Labour Act, the new proposed reforms and new regulations, and then sort of the history of trade unions, and really sort of draws from that into some key actions and recommendations that we can take. And so my colleagues David and Tim in the policy and advocacy team are sort of looking to combine the key findings from that report into an advocacy strategy that will outline some key and concrete actions that can be taken. Now those will be actions that different stakeholders within the supply chain can sort of engage in and can take themselves. Now, I think that those actions haven't yet been finalised, but potentially could be things around advocating for inclusion of the higher wage levels within these new legislative reforms within Northeast India, particularly at sort of the state government level potentially, as well as then also ensuring that we're advocating, you know, at sort of a more centralised level, working with the trade unions, working with commercial partners, sort of to ensure that message is being heard and put into practice along the supply chain. Now, our current plan is for the report to be published potentially in the next few months, and at that time we will try to sort of engage stakeholders potentially with a workshop, or you know, through sort of conversations and dialogue, then to really sort of see how we can further take that forward. So yes, it's very much in the pipeline. It's sort of a work in progress, and something we hope to be able to sort of publish and talk about a bit more in the next few months.
Thank you, Amy. I think that's all we have time for today. We have well past the 2-hour deadline. And in conclusion, I would like to thank all the speakers for their excellent and informative presentations. I also thank all those who have participated in the webinar. Please stay safe and keep healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. Thank you for being a great moderator. And I would again like to thank all the panelists for giving us a lot of insights, right from the producer level to the marketing side. And also, I would like to say that some of the questions which we were not able to take today, we have certainly noted them down, and we will revert by email. So I think our Marcoms team has taken down the questions. We certainly will come back to you with the required information. Thank you once again, everybody. Keep safe, stay healthy. Cheers.
Thank you, Sanjit. Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.